Hello, my name is Nikaya McNeil. I graduated from here at UNCW just last year in 2023. I majored in social work and now I still work here at UNCW full time in the admissions office. And a couple of questions that I have. One, how do you stay firm in your faith working as a professor on a public university campus? And then also, what does Christian community or faith community look like for you outside of your job? Thanks.
Welcome to Meet the Prof. Hey, I am Shane Hartley, and my friend Spence Hackney and I are collecting questions like you just heard from students, and we're interviewing Christian professors. And the goal we have is simple. It's to help encourage Christ-centered conversations on the college campus. So thank you for listening. We're really glad that you're here. Yesterday was a big day when we launched the podcast. I've already had some real encouraging feedback. I appreciate all of that. And we have some amazing interviews we've already finished, and I look forward to sharing with you the next few weeks. So in this episode, we'll get to hear from Dr. Rick Olsen. Rick is a professor and chair in the Department of Communication Studies at the University of North Carolina, Wilmington. Please remember, if you like this, to click on subscribe or follow, and that will really help. And for extra credit, go in your settings and click auto download. So here is our interview with Dr. Rick Olsen. Well, Rick, thank you so much for joining this podcast. And I appreciate you taking this time to answer the students' questions and answer our questions. And so it's great to be with you. How are you doing today?
I'm doing well. Thanks for having me. I'm looking forward to it.
Our pleasure. Yeah, us too. So I learned a lot about you on meettheprof.com. And even though I've known you for years too, but I had never known that you were a shepherd for a year in Vermont. So
yes,
good job with that one.
That was fun. That was pretty trippy being a shepherd and a young Christian at the same time. That was fun.
Hey, are sheep as dumb as people say they are?
There is no doubt that the Lord knew why to call the people sheep. I have seen them do the dumbest things. I mean, just get caught in fences and grass and just, knock stuff over because it's going to be mine instead of yours. And then nobody has any water. I mean, just over and over and over. So yeah, you realize very much the caretaking that humans need from God's perspective as you take care of sheep from a human perspective. That is for sure.
Great metaphor.
That's awesome. And I'm curious about this whole bamboo entrepreneur thing that's on your profile. What is a bamboo entrepreneur?
Okay, so my kids are rolling their eyes because they're going, oh no, not again with the bamboo. So I saw this documentary on bamboo. It's stronger than steel per ounce, and all the, it's flexible. It can be a fiber. It can be a wood. It can be a dust. It can be clothing. It can be building materials. And I just think, I'm like, this is the most fascinating material ever. Oh, and it's, quickly renewable, and it might be able to grow in North Carolina. So my whole thing is, if I could just sort of know that I'd be successful and drop what I'm doing, I would start a bamboo forest park, tourist attraction, employ veterans and others that need, a very, very serene work environment. And we would just have this whole destination and then a store and an online store I've seen bamboo ice cream scoops and bamboo sheets and bamboo, and I just would do all things bamboo. And my kids are going, oh my gosh. So
I love it.
Now it's recorded.
And you know what the great thing about it is? You could plant one piece of bamboo in a field, and in 2 weeks, you would have all the bamboo you ever needed.
Really?
Because the stuff grows that fast.
Yeah. So I have some relatives who are in the timber industry, and I'm like, have you guys ever thought about bamboo? And, he almost got fear in his eyes. He's like, dude, you have no idea what you're talking about.
I think bamboo is the kudzu of forestry. The best I can tell. It's like if you get bamboo somewhere, it's going to take over.
Yes.
Yeah. One of our favorite things to do as a kid was to throw pieces of bamboo in the fire because they explode like grenades. So there's one more attraction for Bamboo World is you can let people throw stuff in the fire.
Students are going to be doing this now.
I love the idea. I love the concept. I'll buy stock. So let's keep going.
I got my first investor.
There you go. I've got $8 with your name on it.
Okay, so you're not an angel investor, but it's a start.
Yeah, I'm more of an imp. I don't know, very small investor.
Well, I love hearing stuff like this that we wouldn't know about you otherwise. Students are always interested to get to know more about their professor than they'd say in the classroom.
Mhm.
The first question we always ask from the students is this one, Rick. What is one embarrassing moment you had when you were a college student?
So there were quite a few. I had a really good friend from New Jersey, and we just embraced being freshmen. So I'll say that helped with all the embarrassing moments. We would look at each other and go, "You're a freshman, aren't you?" And we would just say, "Yep," and we just would make more mistakes. But the most embarrassing probably came when I was being held up as a role model. So I was on the competitive debate and public speaking team. My coach was teaching public speaking, and he said, "Hey, would you be willing to come in and do a model speech for my students so they can, see what we're shooting for?" I said, "Sure." And I was feeling all big and proud. And I get in there and I completely blanked on the speech. I mean, I just froze up, had no idea what was going on. And so he said, "That happens." And then he said, "Go outside, come back in." So I go outside and I'm like, "Oh my gosh," go in the hallway. And then I come back in and I did it, I did finish up, but I tell you what, I was feeling tail tucked all day. Here I was brought in as a role model and doing the exact thing that, you're not supposed to do. But so it keeps me humble, kept me humble.
I love it.
Is that the number one fear to public speaking and forgetting something?
Well, I don't know if it's the number one fear, because I was told when you're public speaking just to imagine the audience naked, and that would calm all your fears.
That does not help.
And that seems like the biggest fear is you're public speaking naked.
Okay.
Yeah.
That's a mixture of things.
Yeah, that's a blend, right?
Yeah, I can sort of imagine.
Well, I've learned on the website that your coming to Christ was pretty young. You were at a church camp, and you shared pretty vulnerably about your family background growing up. And but when you came to Christ, I was wondering if you could tell us more about that. Like, what was most attractive to you about Jesus at first?
So, I mean, if we look at the brief version of the testimony, downwardly mobile, alcoholism, divorce, all the things, lots of yelling, lots of, just making ends meet and doing what we needed to do. And the guy that later became a big mentor in my life was also a recovered alcoholic and leading ministries at the church where my mom was. And so he just took an interest. And the only camp I could afford to go to get away from her was the one sponsored by the church. It's very different to see genuine joy in people that look like you, right? I mean, that's what everybody talks about, right? I mean, we want people that look like us. It's easier for that person to be a role model for us. And so, when I saw these young dudes in their 20s and, just playing guitar and loving Jesus and, leading Frisbee, ultimate Frisbee games and all the stuff, I'm like, oh, okay. So Jesus, so I don't have to give up what I had always wanted to be, which was a cool dude, to be a Jesus freak. And so once I saw those two things kind of integrated, it was a lot easier to go, okay, this is a journey I can be on. I mean, I think a lot of what we see, when we see representatives on, in popular media, it's that they're prudish and they're in their pursuit of piety or righteousness or whatever. And so there's no fun. I think there's that idea anyway, just because of the way young kids and teens and middle school are going to react to authority more generally, right? I'm reacting to perfect authority the way I'm reacting to imperfect authority.
And what do we need to do to help students see Christianity not as a religion of giving up something, but of getting something? Because that seems like it was instrumental in your journey.
When you contrast Jesus's call with hedonism, it can feel restrictive. When you contrast Jesus's call with what the Pharisees were doing, it's tremendous freedom. So part of it is understanding, and then, the hedonism becomes bondage at some point.
That's right.
Now, early on, it may not seem that way, but, C.S. Lewis defines addiction as doing more and more and getting less and less. So I think if we can say, boy, you can be free from anxiety, you can be free from the pressures of perfection, you can be free. I think you just have to emphasize the freedoms of Christ. I think, it's just freedom. Yeah.
I love the line you said that hedonism can turn into bondage, because I think we see that play out in culture over and over again. It's the YouTuber that gets everything they want and then self-destructs. That's an age-old story, it seems like.
Yep.
Yeah.
So Rick, when you were a college student, what was your relationship like with Jesus? What was your faith like? Did your faith grow stronger or weaker?
I was still a fairly young Christian. And of course, I'm in a completely new environment. And I'm still dealing with the trauma and incompleteness of my childhood. So like, yeah, I'm a Christian. I'm a Christian who's grown up with trust issues, you know? So like there was a lot to work on. And I didn't know terms like self-work. And so I'm assuming all of my angst and anxiety is your fault, or, you know, something external to me. And so, you know, there was still a lot of journeying left to do, still is. But I had some good friends, had a good roommate. We had some campus Christian fellowship and some adult mentors. And, you know, and at that point, we didn't really have the super college churches that we have now, but there was room for college students at any given church. And I had family in the area. So, you know, I was grounded, but, you know, knowing Christ is real does not completely remove the staring into the void of who am I supposed to be? What's my life supposed to be about? What's my purpose? All the things that come at this stage of sort of just, human maturation, right? And so connecting those two and trying to figure out, you know, what does God's will mean? You know, so many people are focused on God's will, but not necessarily even understanding God's priority.
What do you mean by that?
Well, I think a lot of times we define God's will as, where should I be? When should I be there? Who should I be with? Who am I going to marry? You know, what job am I supposed to have? Am I supposed to go to Atlanta or Charlotte? And I think as the longer I've kind of walked, there can be times when God wants to do that in your life, and then you'll end up in Charlotte or Atlanta. But I have found that it is really much more about who I am and how I move through the world and why I move through the world. You know, Jesus says, I move where I see my Father moving.
Yeah.
Right. And so there's this, do I have a responsive heart? I could have a responsive heart as a plumber, or I can have a responsive heart as a college professor.
Yeah.
God is less interested in whether I'm a plumber or a professor. He's more interested in whether I have a responsive heart. And so a lot of times I put pressure on myself as a sophomore, junior, senior, especially grown up in poverty, with a hyper sense of autonomy, and I'm going to have to create a good life for myself. And so I've got to think really clearly about the job I want and the marriage partner I'm going to get and all that sort of stuff. And I would get distracted away from simply growing in my Christ likeness and in what God wants me to be and the motives of my heart. My motive for my job was take care of me. That's not God's motive for provision. And so I had to wrestle with that stuff a lot in college.
And so I imagine you have had students come to you and ask you that question, you know, how do I find the God's will for my life? And when you give them this advice, you know, sort of, you know, get close to Christ, align your heart, and sort of trust this will happen. Is that the advice you give, and kind of how's it been received?
I've had some hard conversations with, you know, people who've cheated in my classes and wrestling with majors and dropping out and failing and out and all the things. And some of them have been Christians, you know. So we've had those talks, and I've also had incredibly earnest Christians walk through my door and say, hey, I know you're a Christian professor. Like, lay it on me, bud. What's the wisdom? I've climbed to the mountain and now I want the answer. And in both of those cases, I've just said, you have got to have an awareness of what peace means and wrestle with yourself and what might be the internal obstacles to the peace, and wrestle with what might be alignment with God's will issues for the peace. You know, like maybe you're dating somebody that you know is a dysfunctional, unequally yoked thing. It's not coming out of judgment. It's not coming out of Pharisaic righteousness. It's coming out of, man, this is causing me some inner turmoil. You got to admit that and then make the next right move. I mean, obviously, if they're in crisis, it sounds simplistic.
Yeah.
You know, and that's when I think I try to keep it about them and keep it about Jesus. But also that's sometimes when we're compelled to share our testimony, right? We overcome the darkness by the power of our testimony. And so sometimes being able to say, hey, dude, I screwed up. I held the record, I think, for the longest academic probation at UNCW. 3 days before the semester started, when some dorms that are obviously now old were being built at UNCW, my roommate and I thought it would be a really smart idea to take some bottle rockets, and they didn't have the windows in yet. So we would pick an opening and we'd say, okay, opening 3. And we were having a bottle rocket contest about who could put the bottle rocket through the window that they called out.
Mm-hmm.
Well, obviously bottle rockets are not quiet. So campus police found us. So I have been on academic probation for a full semester plus 3 days, but it forced a crisis in my life, because then they said, you got to go talk to, the counselor or the campus minister. And so I had to talk with the counselor, broke down crying out of nowhere with the counselor. And then she's like, you want to talk to more people? And, we've got counselors, or we've got, Bob, the campus minister. And so I talked with Bob, the campus minister, and that's when I began to unpack, I don't know that it's always useful to dwell in the past, but sometimes you do have to unpack it a little bit to move forward.
Yeah. What I learned from this is that a lot of good can come with playing with fireworks, because none of that would have happened if you.
Yeah, you're big into that. Bamboo explodes.
With the strangest takeaways.
There's the thing.
Yeah, I think you're sitting with a pyro.
I'm just 12 years old.
Yeah.
I'm just in an adult body. That's the difference here. That's great. Cool. See, it's how does your faith inform your classroom? Like when you're in front of people, it sounds like you're pretty open about this with people. Tell us a little about that.
So a friend of mine talks about spiritual maturity as the natural, normal use of Scripture. And so I tried to take that into my teaching. So when I witness, I do it in the most integrated way possible. And but I do have boundaries. And my boundary is I will never lose my credibility as a professor in order to witness, because I will also lose the credibility of my witness. In other words, if I hijack a classroom where people are not free to leave because I take attendance, then I've violated a professional trust, which undermines my credibility as a Christian. So I'm going to ask permission. Student in crisis in my office, hey, I'd like to ask permission to pray for you. But in my classroom, I'll use positive examples from my life as a volunteer in a faith community, and I'll use negative ones. I'm like, hey guys, if you think, and I'll even say, some of you come from faith traditions. I'll keep it ecumenical, but I can get at least faith out there as a conversation point. I'll say, hey, some of you come from faith traditions. They're not going to save you from any of the stuff we're talking about. You still got to be a critical thinker. You still want to use faith plus research when your church is making a decision or your faith community is making a decision. And so I pop in and out rather than sort of saying, hey, I'm going to witness right now, and then I'm going to step back in. It's just the human condition goes with us into our faith communities. And because I study communication studies, I can say, hey, this is how the human condition has shown up here, and this is how it's shown up here. And, and what that does is I think it gives permission for Christian students, and I also have some proverbs in my syllabus, proverbs about communication, proverbs about critical thinking.
Yes.
Don't celebrate your folly, so I've got stuff in there like that, but that gives students permission to pursue their faith in their class projects. Hey, we're going to look at, I had one great project on interfaith marriage. And I don't think that happens unless I sort of share the way I have. To say faith is messy and there's all these sorts of things. And they're like, oh, what are the communication struggles in an interfaith marriage? Cool. Okay, let's do it.
Some students.
One of our joys is getting questions from students. And there are also some recent grads who have given us questions. And so listen to this one.
Hello, my name is Nikaya McNeil. I graduated from here at UNCW just last year in 2023. I majored in social work, and now I still work here at UNCW full-time in the admissions office. And a couple of questions that I have. One, how do you stay firm in your faith working as a professor on a public university campus? And then also, what does Christian community or faith community look like for you outside of your job? Thanks.
Yeah, those are great questions, Nikaya, because I think if you're going to really have a sustainable faith walk, both of those issues have to get wrestled with. How do you kind of be salt and light? To some extent, you've got to connect with the world around you without becoming overly comfortable or a part of the world around you, right? So, I look at, there's only one group of people Jesus got mad at. And so like what I want to make sure is I don't share any characteristics with those people. And that was the Pharisees, right? They were set apart in a way that was judgmental, not in a way that was aspirational. And I think we're called to be set apart in a way that's aspirational. And I think that's really important. I mean, one of the high points of my Christian life was like one dude came up to me, he goes, "What is your deal?"
Mm-hmm.
But he meant it in like, how do you do that? How do you live? How are you that happy? And you got nothing. You're riding a bike, you don't have a car, like, as I said earlier, you have to be a critical thinker too. And so you have to be willing to admit, hey, Christian nationalism comes with problems. Medieval Christianity came with problems. Catholicism, like you have to, if somebody wants to go, you have to go, yeah. But that doesn't deny the essentials of the gospel. It doesn't deny the essentials of the Nicene Creed and Christ coming to earth and the miraculous resurrection. That's human institution stuff. So I think you have to be willing to admit that and not get hyper defensive about, hey, there's nothing wrong with anything. And I think you have to have enough awareness of pop culture, of contemporary life, that you can relate. And then in terms of the faith community question, I was just talking with my pastor about this, and I said, one of the reasons I really enjoy this church is that this community is not walking away from two big things that are hard to deal with. One is ambiguity and mystery as part of the faith journey, and the other is suffering. To the extent that we try and suppress those in the search for triumphant bumper sticker Christianity or certainty that doesn't have us wrestling with stuff, that's going to vastly sterilize the theology that we're preaching. It will bear no fruit. And so I think it's important to find a faith community that fully embraces the human condition and says, this is why we're called into community. Yeah. Because we need each other. We're going to suffer together. We're going to triumph together. We're going to navigate ambiguity together. And since ambiguity and suffering are inevitable, the best thing we can do is figure out how God wants us to process it. And when you're there, then you can be real. Then you can have a bad week without feeling like you're a bad wit or a bad Christian. So it's hard. I mean, and I hope people who are listening are going, dang, this guy screwed up. We all sorry to break it to you. There's no Santa Claus and we're all screwed up. At some level, we got stuff we got to lay down and wrestle with. And you never know how a hurt or a disruption is going to be the catalyst into that.
You just made this podcast unsuitable for kids. We don't edit out very much. So this line about there being no Santa Claus, we might get in trouble for that.
Wait, what?
Well, you stop coming to my house. I'll say it that way.
All right.
The Bible calls us into critical thinking, be wise as wise as a serpent, gentle as a dove, right? I mean, so there's this idea that we really are supposed to discern even while we love others and trust with great vulnerability as a dove would, and be gentle but also really, really pray for discernment. What's the number one thing to pray for is wisdom. I did a paper in grad school on wisdom, and basically in a nutshell, wisdom is how to take eternal truths into a local situation. That's the wise person.
Yep.
It's able to say, this is who God is and how God is eternally, and this is how it's probably manifesting in this situation, and here's what we ought to do in this moment. It's like, I think God wants to see us. I mean, I always, when I think about my role as a parent, I want to see my kids grow, and I want to see them grow as they wrestle with big questions and find answers that are empowering to them and also full of purpose and full of contributing and participating in the healing of the world and communities, et cetera. But I want to see them do hard stuff. I want to see my kids slide tackle in soccer and, get up and do all the things, right? Well, I mean, I think God's kind of like that too. I want to see you guys wrestle with this human condition mystery and the faith mystery. And when you work it out and create beautiful ministry together, that brings joy to my heart. So when I've dealt with students in crisis and as I've started to also contemplate my own retirement, I've started working out a model in my head. I'm more of a thinker than a reader. I mean, I read, but I love to think. And so I've been working out this idea that a sustainable life has to worry about things. And I love alliteration. I should have been maybe a Baptist preacher, but I do like So there's this idea of provision. I got to make rent, but I also want purpose. And if I confuse those two, then I define myself by my job, and that's probably not what we need to do. So I've got provision, I've got purpose, I've got passions, right? I have emotional realities and things that excite me, and so I also enjoy being a musician in a garage band and in worship teams, and that whole musical experience is a passion of mine. But then there's also pace and how, if I'm graspy, if I'm then I'm not making room for interruption or people.
Right.
And then finally there's peace. Right. So I want all of those things to kind of come together. And when I've dealt with people that were cheating or not being their best selves, usually, especially in college, it's that pace issue. I'm trying to get it all now. I'm trying to get too much crammed in. I'm trying to do everything all at once. And it's like, okay, but that's why you ended up wrecking your proverbial car.
Yeah. Well, so Rick, we have some lightning round questions for you. So,
all right, lightning round, ready?
So you can strap yourself down. All right, first question is, what advice would you give your 18-year-old self?
Don't quit piano. So that would be the number one thing. But actually, the other thing I would say is it'd be around that stuff about pace. Yeah, you were desperate to get out of one circumstance, but leave room for people in your walk.
Great. All right. What advice would you give a graduating senior?
Know what you bring to the table. Know what you bring to a community. Take some time to just embrace self-awareness.
Sure. What advice would you give other Christian professors?
Integrate your witness. Don't make it a sidebar in a magazine.
All right. What advice would you give parents of college students?
Your kid can find faith or trouble at any college campus.
Are some easier
so don't blame it on the campus.
Right.
Well, so Rick, I know students will enjoy getting to know you more just on meettheprof.com, but if they wanted to contact you to talk more about any of these things, how could they contact you?
So I'm unapologetically an email guy. So so it would be with my campus email, and that can be, if you're at UNCW, that's really easy. It's olsenar@uncw.edu. If you are off campus at some other campus, but we clicked, same old thing. Be happy to talk to anybody, anywhere, anytime.
Awesome. Well, thank you for taking this time just to talk with us. And it's just a joy to get to spend time with you. The way you think always challenges me in my thinking. I appreciate you being such a critical thinker. And I'm truly thankful that you are at UNC Wilmington. And so, yeah, I consider you a good friend and just appreciate you. So thank you for this time.
Absolutely. Thanks for having me on. And I wish you the best in this ongoing profile of folks.
Well, I hope you enjoyed that interview, and you can learn more as well as read about other Christian professors on our website, meettheprof.com, and you can search for professors by name or by state or even by college campus. And you can also find many helpful resources about questions that were in the interview and other ways of answering tough questions at cru.org, and that's cru.org. And college students, if you would like to ask a question to a professor and potentially be on the show, this is how you do it. Follow us on Instagram. It's Meet the Prof Official. And then upload us a video by direct message where you say your name, your college campus, and what year you are, and then ask your question. And you can ask more than one question. And hopefully then you can be featured on the show. And if you enjoyed this, would you please share this episode with a friend? Someone you think it would be helpful to. And please don't forget to follow or subscribe to the podcast. And if you're listening to this, but you would like to watch the videos of these interviews, we record them all and we put them on YouTube. So you can subscribe to our YouTube channel, which is Meet the Prof Official. And we would love to meet you there. And lastly, if you would like to financially support our Faculty Commons ministry with Cru, you can do so online by going to give.cru.org/0424344. So thank you for being with us. And until next time, we hope you feel encouraged to have a Christ-centered conversation on your college campus.